Alright, hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel for my first 2026 video. I know I made a video a couple days ago about my favorite songs of 2025, but this really feels like the first video of 2026 for me. I've actually had these reviews done for quite a while now, like since pretty much the start of the year, because these were just kind of some quick reviews I put together with albums that came out at the very start of 2026. But I wanted to prioritize getting my top 50 songs of 2025 out first before I moved on to 2026 content. So I've got some other mini album reviews in the works right now as well. Hopefully those will be posted soon. But yeah, for now I've got 7 albums to talk about. These are all from smaller artists. I saw a stat recently that showed that like a third of music that's posted on streaming services or something like that is AI generated, and I sort of realized like, oh shit, I hope none of this is AI generated without me knowing. But I found all of these, or at least most of these, on Rate Your Music, so I feel pretty confident that these are real people making these albums. But I don't really know who a lot of these artists are. These are all smaller acts, so yeah, just random stuff I found. I thought, may as well get a bit of a head start on reviews for the year, so I just reviewed all of these. I just wrote all of these really early in the year, and hopefully find some great albums along the way, but stay tuned to find out. So, yeah, I guess we'll get the reviews started with... Alright everyone, it's the first review of 2026, and for some reason I was thinking I'd reviewed this artist at some point in my music reviewing journey, either back in the day on my blog, or maybe at some point on my YouTube channel. But after searching through a bunch of my reviews, I couldn't find anything, so I'm guessing I've just seen the name on certain music reviewing spaces on the internet. And it turns out this artist has a lot of albums, way too many for me to try and listen to before listening to this one, so I just decided to check out this new album, and it's actually quite good. I wasn't really expecting all that much, considering it's slowcore, which isn't usually a genre I like all that much, but I did end up being pulled into this beautiful musical experience, and I think I may have found a pretty strong gem of an album early in the year. And this was actually the first album I listened to in 2026. The only reason it ended up first in this video is due to randomization. Now, I read about this album on its Bandcamp page, and Atomiste, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, describes a really difficult mental health journey in 2025, and I wish them all the best in 2026. They also mention that while the album tells the story of someone's journey towards suicide, they make it clear that the album is not about themselves, and they still have hope and are not going to give up. And again, I wish them all the best. By the way, I don't know what this artist's pronouns are. I haven't really seen any of those online, so I'm just saying they for now. Now, it is worth mentioning that this album is instrumental, which is why it gets a little tricky for me to fully immerse myself in the concept of the album when there are no lyrics, and thus I can't help but feel like the hope for 2026 in the artist's personal life maybe shines through a little bit into the album, but it's hard to say. Honestly, I feel like there's a sense of both depression and hope throughout this album, at least the way I hear it. The opening track feels like a new beginning. Who knows what happens from there, but it's very fitting that this was the first new song I heard in 2026. And honestly, from there I think there's a lot of beautiful moments, even though the album's story has a sad ending. I love the explosive build on Often Dreaming of Giant Waves, the staticky blur of In Fear of Your Own Fire, and the closing track is a very pretty way of expressing sadness. But before I shower these tracks with too much praise, I will mention this album is much more about the whole album experience, not the individual songs. I'm likely going to forget a lot of these individual tracks, at least if I don't end up returning to this album a lot, which may or may not be the case. I do think this might be worth revisiting at some point, but again, slowcore isn't really a genre that I'm really that into, and I do get busy with other reviews all the time, and there are so many albums I love that I still barely ever listen to, so this one might end up getting lost in the endless blur of music for me, at least temporarily. I do plan on listening to a lot more in 2026, and thus albums like this one might not stick as much as I'd like. But still, if you want a really nice slowcore album to kick off 2026, I think this one will do the trick. I was not expecting to like this as much as I did, but for me it's a strong 7 out of 10, and damn near great. Again, I'm hugely impressed by this. Alright, we got the first hardcore album of 2026 for me, probably the first rock album actually. And I'll be honest, this kind of hardcore has never really been my cup of tea. I usually prefer it with more atmospheric moments and more experimentation rather than blending it with punk. And it's kind of funny that I'm saying that because I do really like punk music. But I don't know, for some reason when post-hardcore slash metalcore are combined with punk, maybe even pop-punk vibes, it creates a weird mix where it kind of feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. But anyway, this is my first experience listening to an album by this band, and honestly, I think it's okay. Again, it's not really my thing. The production is pretty good for the most part, even though in a few moments the mixing can get kind of blurry and not in a good way. The guitars and drums have some nice energy though, I can praise it for that. But I don't really find the vocals all that interesting, and while I respect the writing about losing your sense of self and desperately trying to find human connection, or maybe even just a connection to some higher power, or anything just to numb the pain and maybe to escape the numbness, look, it's going to resonate with some people, and I can respect that, but it doesn't really do much for me, even though I do quite like how the closing track uses the "take the rain" pun as a way of inspiring you to take the rain even though it's too late. Which I interpret to mean trying to find a way to happiness even when it feels like all hope is lost. But again, I just really wish this all connected with me more. I already mentioned liking the production for the most part, but sometimes with headphones and the balance can be a little bit off, or the balance can be a little bit off with some of the sound levels with headphones on. And again, there are points where the mix is kind of blurry, and I just don't find the compositions very compelling. I can respect it's a well-assembled album, but it's just not for me, so 6 out of 10, I guess. It might be worth checking out, just not really my thing. Alright, so I'd actually never heard of this act either until now. Honestly, all the albums I'm reviewing in this video were released on January 1st, and I just wanted to get a head start on album reviews for the year. So that's why I'm reviewing all these albums. And not a lot of popular music gets released on the first day of the year, so I had to search for more obscure stuff, which honestly I think can be a good thing. I mean, yeah, I have a harder time predicting what will actually be good, but it does give smaller acts more attention, which I think is a win for everyone. Yeah, I know I don't have a huge following yet, but it still might introduce a couple people to these artists. And it is a real shame when I have to make a negative review on one of those albums, because I don't like hating on smaller artists. But for me, it doesn't mean I'm hating, just that I don't like said album, even though some people might like it. It's all subjective at the end of the day. And I do think that no matter how big or small my following is, I still kind of have an all press is good press mindset toward my reviews. So yeah, if I'm introducing you to a smaller artist, even if I don't like it, I still think it could potentially help the artist, at least if I get a big enough following someday. So with all this out of the way, what the hell is this? Okay, fine, it's art. Very abstract art. And I'm sorry, but I just can't get into this at all. It's full of samples and chopped up vocals, as well as lead vocals that I just personally find really difficult to listen to. I'm not sure whether or not they're intentionally off-pitch by design, but either way, I just don't find it pleasant to listen to, or at least not atop these noisy instrumentals full of terrible distortion and strange sound effects, which all combine into multiple clusterfucks of randomness, and I don't enjoy it at all. I couldn't find the lyrics for this album, and I can only hear some of them, but two things. One, even though I could hear some of them, it's difficult to properly try and analyze them when I can't look at them in front of me, and I can only base it off of what I'm hearing at the moment, in whichever song. And two, I just don't like the way this sounds, so I don't really care that much if there might be something more to the lyrics, because again, in my opinion, it's annoying to listen to. There are a couple good moments in the second half that are at least a little bit redeeming, some good melodies, some improvements in production, and much more tolerable vocals, but none of this is going to be getting any replay from me, so I'll give it a 4 out of 10. I'd rather be able to genuinely praise all these albums, but this one did not work for me at all. Maybe you'll like it more, but it's absolutely not for me. This is the debut full-length album from this American indie rock band fronted by Snöw, who wrote about this album on Bandcamp, and it turns out she's quite the music listener as well. And this immediately reminded me of Weezer, who funnily enough are referenced on this album, which pretty much confirms how much Weezer influence there is on this album. But what I find fascinating is that Snöw herself even admits she doesn't think this is a truly great album, rather the best record she could have made at this time. And I respect her honesty about that, and also the way she describes each song as a snow-baked cookie, inspired by her desire to see snow as a kid growing up in Arizona. And she said this record represents making the impossible possible, and goes on to say, "You can't bake cookies in the snow," in both the Bandcamp description and the album itself. But then in the description she says, "But you can still create the idea that somebody did." Honestly, I found all of that pretty cool. So, how's the album? Well, I think she's right that it isn't truly great, but it also does show a lot of potential, and I absolutely understand being proud of this album. Not only for making an album, but also because I can hear the amount of effort and craft that went into this, and I think there's some quality here as well. I like the stylistic diversity throughout the record, where songs differentiate from each other quite a bit, and there are clearly many more influences here beyond just Weezer. And the best moments go really hard, with some absolutely crushing guitar on tracks like the title track, Elliott Page, and Keeping Up Appearances. And while the production is kind of shaky throughout the record, at its best the guitar distortion and drums really shine and make for some killer passages in this fairly short album which runs just over half an hour. And I do like some of the lyrics too, like the desire for society to break cycles of submissiveness on the opening track, the unique way Sean writes about moving forward from past regrets on a view on happiness, and the strange ways of clinging on to an idea of a person were interestingly analyzed in a couple tracks here as well. But my favorite song on the record has got to be Frostbitten, which is full of so much personality and some brutally honest lines that kinda got a chuckle out of me, whether that was intended or not, and it's a catchy as hell song. I love the chorus on that one. I do wish more of the album was this good, but I'll still give it a strong 6 out of 10 overall. There's some solid moments on this record, and I respect the ambition of it a lot, even though the production is pretty inconsistent, and I feel like this band has more in the tank. So it's quite good, and honestly, I'll say there's a pretty good chance their next album will be great. I'll have to keep an eye out. I'm going to keep this one fairly brief. Another thing I should say is I don't want to spend too much time on this YouTube channel, especially discussing albums I don't like that much. But just to be clear, I don't think this is terrible or anything. It's just not really my cup of tea. Now for context, again, I never heard of this artist either until now. But I decided to check out this album full of samples and lots of experimental sound effects. And I definitely haven't heard anything quite like it recently. Although that's probably just because I haven't listened to this style of music at all recently, and also just because it's different for me doesn't mean I particularly like it. I find the vocals kind of grating to listen to, personally, even though I can understand why they might work for this kind of art experiment. And I personally like some of the lyrics in certain moments like Love Me, where the narrator wants someone to embrace him for who he really is. And I especially like the closing line of that song, "Love me, just don't get in the way of my next masterpiece." But most of this album just feels inessential. In fact, at least to me, all of it does. But there's some weird dynamics in the sound which make certain moments way louder than they need to be, and it's quite a weird contrast with other parts of the album. And overall, it just doesn't really feel like there's anything that connects this all together into more than the sum of its parts. Maybe there is, and I'm just missing it, but I'm reviewing this based on my personal opinion of it, and even if there is some larger concept or something, it's not doing anything for me, which is why this is getting a 5 out of 10. Not a bad record, but for me it's just kinda there. So just like with the first artist I talked about in this video, I was thinking I had reviewed this artist as well, but I guess not. I must be confusing Orkane for someone else. But anyway, it would not be a first mini review video of the year for Simon Tuck's music without reviewing a very mellow instrumental electronic ambient album. I mean, it's basically tradition for me at this point, even though this isn't typically a style of music I particularly like. But I decided to give this a shot because I can sometimes really like ambient music, and I think it starts fairly strong with an opener that, in the right setting, could really have some poignancy. And then unfortunately from that point on, I just kind of lose interest. Yeah, Liss, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, the 6th song in the album, is a fairly pleasant track, and none of this is awful by any means. But at the end of the day, it kind of just feels like another ambient album, and if there's a genre that is the worst to be generic in, it's probably ambient music. At least with a generic country album, or maybe even a generic rock album, I might be able to mostly enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it actually kind of escapes that label from me, because the closing track is a nearly 12-minute piece, which actually has some interesting stuff in it. I'm not saying it's anything I would go out of my way to listen to, but I like the textures of the keyboards, or whatever the instruments are. They're most likely not actually real instruments. And it really has some nice atmosphere, and is a pretty cool way to end the record, with the constant transformation of that track. So it bumps up my score for this to a very light 6 out of 10. Really just not my cup of tea. But if you decide to listen to it, I hope you like it. So here's another very experimental album. I saw it labeled as underground rap on Apple Music, although it didn't really end up sounding how I expected it to. It's very glitchy, and there are some prominent vocal effects throughout the entire record. It's very prominent vocal effects. And I wish I could say I liked it, but I just don't. And just like with the Lampreys and Oricon A and Little Boy Velvet, I feel kind of bad for this one because it's another smaller artist, and I want to be able to praise it for that reason. But after a while, this can start to get really tedious to me. Look, I get what this album's trying to do. The narrator starts out feeling like a bystander to all of their surroundings, and then goes through a bunch of ups and downs before eventually trying to prove the haters wrong and recognizes their own worth. But there are a few problems for me. One being that the narrator really just seems to be attention-seeking by the end of it, and seems genuinely mad at people for not recognizing whatever they do, and it can get really insufferable, and I can totally see right through it. But the bigger problem for me is that there isn't much in the way of catchiness or anything that would make this 40-minute runtime worth it, even just a little bit. And when the album sounds so noisy in a way that doesn't have any artistic value for me personally, and that just sounds so disjointed, it makes me wonder what the appeal of it even is. But okay, maybe there is more to this than I'm giving it credit for. At least I'll admit there are a couple moments throughout where I can appreciate the atmospheric production. That is, when this doesn't sound like a total mess. I can get behind the vibe of a couple of these tracks, and maybe some people will find the lyrical concept more interesting and better executed than I did. Again, I'm trying to be nice here, but I also will totally admit I did not enjoy this album. So for me, it's a light 5 out of 10, and hopefully this doesn't scare anyone away from the record. That's not my intent. But honestly, I just think there's a lot of better music out there in the underground, including some I've discussed in this video. So, make of all that what you will. But at the end of the day, those are all just my opinions on those albums. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. Feel free to comment in the description if you have heard any of these albums, what you think of them. Or just feel free to let me know what you thought of my video. I know sometimes I'm maybe a little bit harsh on some of these albums, even though they're by smaller artists. But again, I kind of just think, like, you know, hopefully if any of these artists come across this, they'll be honored that I took the time to talk about the album. But anyway, thanks for watching. I do have another mini review video all written, actually. I just have to actually film it and publish it. But first, I got to publish this one. Yeah, it's a new year. I'm hoping to review hopefully a lot more music in 2026. I'm so far on the right track in that regard. But anyway, we'll see. For now, thank you for watching. I will see you all later.